Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our May webinar. Today, we'll be focusing on what has been, I think, one of the more vexing topics in energy efficiency, one of the most complicated kind of issues to tackle, but also a huge opportunity. And that's, how can landlords, property managers, and tenants work together to incorporate energy efficiency, sustainability into tenant spaces, tenant build-outs, the leasing process, all the way through. Really excited about the content today. We have some great guest speakers for you, and as always, we're trying to get the owner's perspective in all of our conversations as well. So I want to thank our panelists in advance for bringing those real-world best practices and examples. As always, presented by LADWP, our primary funder, so thank you for the support. A few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded. Lines will be muted just to keep things orderly, but there will be some time. We've budgeted some time at the end for questions. So please type those into the chat box and we'll do our best to get to all of those. And if anyone was not able to join today, we will be including a copy of the slides, the recording, and links to relevant materials in our follow-up blast, along with some information about next month's webinar. I think we have a lot of new folks in the room today, which is fantastic. So I wanted to briefly touch on some background on who is the LA Better Buildings Challenge. We are funded, as I mentioned, by LADWP and SoCalGas to really work at this intersection of buildings, government utilities, so policy, and technology or integration of these practices into buildings. So this is the space where we work trying to make sure that the utility incentives that apply to projects make their way to those projects and working to help really connect the dots. We offer a range of services to help do that. I won't go through this at length, but includes benchmarking, rebate identification, project development, and then, of course, helping to tell the story to highlight leaders and successful examples that others can follow. And the LABBC network is really that high-performance buildings network and facilitating some peer-to-peer learning so that everyone's not trying to reinvent the wheel. And that's very much the spirit of what we're going to be getting into today. So with that, I will be handing it over to my guest speakers for the duration of today's presentation. First to Emily McLaughlin. She's a director at Greenprint Center for Building Performance, which is part of the Urban Land Institute now. But it was she'll tell more background about that. But one of the things that I think is so cool about it is that it came from industry, the original idea. And then one of our partners, Jessica Loper, Director of Sustainability at Commonwealth. So thank you both in advance. With that, I will hand it over to Jessica, who's going to to Emily, who's going to MC most of the content today and guide us towards these key learning objectives. So with that, I will hand over the screen to Emily McLaughlin.
Thanks, Dave. Just trying, here we go. All right, so hi everybody, this is Emily McLaughlin. Dave, thanks for the intro. As you heard, I'm director on the Greenprint Center for Building Performance at the Urban Land Institute. Some of you all may be familiar with ULI, but for those of you that may not be, we're a membership-based organization. We have about 42,000 plus members that represent all different sectors and parts of the real estate cycle. So owners, developers, architects, engineers, designers, et cetera. We have representation throughout our membership. And the Greenprint Center specifically is one of the arms of ULI's Center for Sustainability and Economic Performance. So the other two arms, as you can see on this slide, are urban resilience and building healthy places. So urban resilience is more focused on the climate adaptation, so making our buildings more resilient, more adaptive to risk, all the things that we see that are increasing because of the increasing effects of climate change. Greenprint, on the other hand, is more focused on climate mitigation. So our members, which represent about 30, give or take, members, owners and developers in the real estate community, who have collectively committed to a goal of a 50% greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2030. And so through that, the Greenprint Center promotes a lot of networking, best practice sharing, measurement, benchmarking of energy, waste, and water, knowledge sharing, analysis discussions, all through our collective engagement with both the companies that join Greenprint as well as their individuals. So usually directors of sustainability, et cetera, whoever their sustainability person is. So this webinar is particularly exciting for me because not only do I get to talk about one of the programs that I manage called the Tenant Energy Optimization Program, but I also get to do it with one of our Greenprint members, which is Commonwealth Partners. So really excited to have Jessica on this with us and to talk about all the awesome stuff that Commonwealth is doing. So to give everybody level set overview of what we're talking about when we talk about the Tenant Energy Optimization Program, TEOP for short. You'll hear me say TEOP a lot more than the long Tenant Energy Optimization Program. So this is an initiative that falls under ULI's broader sustainability framework. And it's really meant to be a resource for those that are looking to build out a lease space in an energy efficient and sustainable manner. So the program was initially, and still is, championed by Tony Malkin of the Empire State Realty Trust. And there was a core group of real estate experts and leaders who were part of the development and initial implementation of the program. So it started initially with 10 tenant fit outs, 10 initial case studies, pilot projects, and it's definitely evolved and expanded since. But as you can see, users of the program can typically see 30 to 50% energy savings, as well as relatively fast payback periods, generally in the 3 to 5 year range, which is particularly important, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we start going through the steps. To give everybody, to kind of answer one of the questions that we usually get is how is this different than LEED? How is this different than WELL? Any of those other building certifications that are really critical parts of the market. While a LEED or a WELL or anything like that is really a path to a certification based on science and data and research and everything, this is meant to be more of a process. The end goal of TEOP is not a specific certification. Any green certification, any program such as that, they go hand in hand with TEOP. It's meant to be complementary, but it's definitely not a competitor. It's not the same thing. It's definitely meant to be a complementary process to help you build out any sort of leased space. So on this side, as Jessica goes through in a minute, we'll be going through each of the 10 steps. And we're going to talk about, in a lot more detail, all the really awesome stuff that Commonwealth Partners is doing. What I want this slide and the next one to do is just level set and make sure that everybody understands what the 10 steps are and kind of give a holistic overview of them. So as you can see, the first steps are really all about selecting the right team, selecting the right space, making sure that both your space and your team is aligned with you and your sustainability and energy goals. So that means seeking out a landlord, an architect, an engineer, designer, whoever it may be that shares your vision of sustainability. On the other end of the spectrum, on step 10, it's really all about that communication. So that's ongoing landlord and tenant communication, that's regular energy consumption, transparency, communication of certifications and initiatives, and anything that's being undertaken in the space. That's all that's going to happen in that post-occupancy phase when tenants are already moved into the space. So what I do want to call out too is that in this pre-lease phase, so steps 1 and 2, this is where you're really going to be getting your lease in shape, and hopefully you're going to be creating a really solid green lease. Or bare minimum, you're going to be integrating some green lease clauses or maybe a green lease addendum. Best case scenario would obviously be a full green lease, but that's not always realistic first go around, but that is the goal. And those steps will hopefully get you to a place where you can earn the Department of Energy and Institute for Market Transformation certification of green lease leaders. which really indicates that you have executed a green energy aligned lease. In that middle phase, that design and construction, where that calculating projected financial returns, making final decisions, all of that nitty-gritty energy modeling and calculations that go on during the design and construction phase, that's when you're going to be setting yourself up to get Energy Star certification. So that's going to be the point that you want to be focusing on if you have a goal of a certification such as that. All right, so last slide here to level set before I turn it over to Jessica and we really go into the steps. So what you can see here is these are those initial 10 pilot projects that I mentioned a minute ago. And obviously, you know, one of the big takeaways would be you've got some pretty impressive total savings. You know, you've got the leased area. But what I also want to draw your attention to is who these companies are and what those payback periods are. So obviously, as you can see, most of these companies are household names. They're companies we know and love and recognize. But by and large, their missions are not solely dedicated to energy and sustainability. Even more than that, when these pilot projects were completed 5, 6, 7 years ago, corporate commitment to sustainability and energy efficiency really was not a given. So we didn't have the We Are Still In campaign, we didn't have science-based targets, even things like corporate sustainability reports weren't really a given and an obvious component of a corporate strategy. But even still, these companies saw that there was value in stronger landlord-tenant collaboration, and they knew that that could help them save money and energy, and it was going to help both of their bottom lines. So even if the energy savings that they knew that they were going to be getting wasn't the main draw for them, they knew that the payback period was going to be pretty fast turnaround as far as projects are concerned. And when you weigh that with their total savings, it's a pretty impressive figures. So obviously we don't want to underemphasize the total savings or any of that, but I definitely want to draw attention to the fact that this program is really for everybody. It can be tailored, it can be scalable, it can be molded to your specific situation, and hopefully you'll see in just a second how Jessica and Commonwealth Partners has done that for themselves. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Jessica.
Great, thanks, Emily. My name is Jessica Loper. I'm the Director of Sustainability for Commonwealth Partners, which is a privately owned real estate development management organization. And we own and manage Class A multi-tenant office towers throughout major metropolitan areas that totals over 10 million gross square feet and around 30,000 building occupants that come to work each day. And every property has their own set of parameters, but we try to maintain an overall corporate sustainability measures with each. And for today, we're going to talk about City National Plaza, which is located in downtown Los Angeles. So although our sustainability programs have been in effect for some time, we officially began our corporate sustainability programs in 2013 and have been improving with consistently providing tenant engagement programs at all of our managed properties over these last 6 years. And we fully embrace that these programs could not have been implemented without the buy-in from our tenants. So with that, I'd say let's get started.
Great. So as we go through these 10 steps, I will jump in with a quick overview explanation of what this step is, and then I will turn it back over to Jessica, and she will tell you specifically what Commonwealth has done as they really prioritize landlord-tenant engagement. So for the first step, select a team. So selecting a team is really all about getting like-minded team members on board who are sharing your vision. So if you're a tenant, that means making sure your architect, your engineer, even your landlord, especially your landlord, Anybody that's going to be helping you in the build-out process is all working together with you towards that energy optimized vision. So on the other side, if you're an architect, if you're an engineer, if you're some other stakeholder that's going to be participating in the build-out process, it's not just up to the tenant to reach out to you. You as a stakeholder who's participating in the build-out process should also be prepared to make suggestions of your own for cost-saving measures, unique features, anything. It's definitely very much a team partnership collaboration.
Great. And I would say I'll be coming from the perspective, as Emily said, as the landlord and how we can be useful to the tenant. And so although we have hundreds of tenants within our portfolio, our property teams will sit down and try to provide somewhat of a boutique experience where we listen to their goals, their objectives for their tenant improvements. So for this first step, as part of working with our tenants per the lease agreements, they are able to choose whatever contractor and look the way they want in their space. But first, what we do is we have a meeting to go over their proposal. So our suggestion would be to make sure you have a broker that's knowledgeable in sustainability. And if they aren't, it's important to incorporate someone that understands sustainability measures. Ultimately, for us, it really is a tenant's decision, but the base building engineer must be part of the discussion to ensure that the initiatives that they have will work. So one example is, if you're installing new lighting fixtures and you need to cut into the wall, we need to make sure that there's a way that it will work properly. And another thing to mention is that you may have a multi-year project with a long-term goal. So even though you may not be able to implement all your projects right away, it's important just to set this pathway and flexibility to get there in the future. And having that team and buy-in with all the interested parties is key right at the beginning.
Great, thanks, Jessica. And one thing I'll add too that I should have added on step one, in this whole process, team members may be added as you go through the process. So step one is not the end-all be-all of adding team members. It's definitely only just that, step one. So for step two, selecting a space, in this case, select an office space. And this is all really about choosing the most efficient base building that you possibly can. So it's going to be taking a really critical eye to the spaces that you're considering, as well as asking the difficult and the important questions about what those base building systems are and how efficient they are. So things like the HVAC system, the windows, insulation, how ventilation impacts the air quality. All of these things are things that you want to be asking the questions of now, because as I'm guessing most people on this call are either firsthand familiar with or secondhand familiar with, changing those things down the line is not impossible, but it's definitely much harder. So you want to be selecting the best space that you possibly can to make your job down the line easier. And additionally, and what we'll be talking about here and what Jessica will be really going into is this is really the step, as I had mentioned earlier in the intro, to really get your green lease in line. You want to be using this as the time to begin using your lease as a vehicle that can help you. So now's the time to begin having those conversations. Yeah,
so if you're still at the point of looking for new tenant space, I'd say take a look at tools like CoStar that allow you to filter out buildings that are Energy Star labeled, for example, and that can help determine an efficient base building. And I mean, selecting a building for many building owners, they cannot access all the energy meters within their building without the consent of individual tenants. So preventing them from benchmarking the building's total energy consumption and limiting their ability to evaluate energy efficiency opportunities that make energy improvements that ultimately save energy and money. And so that's kind of the little fact, known fact about the building industry and a major barrier to energy efficiency in commercial buildings. And so for us, we provide green lease language for all of our incoming tenants, and it's optional, and there are negotiations with that. Those that, for our perspective, those that are old existing tenants that have been around for a long time and may not have a green lease, we have worked with them, and we'll show later, of various sustainability programs, so they are fully aware of our objectives, regardless if they have a lease or not, which I think is key. We have a little example here is what we provide as part of our examples to tenants of various programs with signage of these different locations, just to help understand when they are going through the tenant engagement improvement process, are there areas that they can make adjustments? So we provide examples and ideas, but not requirements.
Great. So now with step 3, we are on to some of the more nitty-gritty pieces of the 10 steps of TEOP. So obviously, much like it's important to make sure that all of your team members are on the same page as far as energy and sustainability goals, corporate sustainability commitments, both on the landlord and the tenant side, are really, really important to consider in this step when you're setting energy performance goals. So, obviously Jessica is, sharing from Commonwealth's perspective, from a landlord's perspective, but I definitely encourage everybody on the line to think, regardless of whether you're on the tenant side or the landlord side, or you're a stakeholder helping one or both sides. Now is the time in this process to think about what your corporate goals are. And if those are not goals that are already set internally as a company, again, both as a tenant and a landlord, that's a conversation that can start now. It may not, identically match the build-out process, but making sure that you use the space that you're in and the space that you're leasing as an offshoot of those goals is really beneficial to both. So it's really important for those tenants that are looking for a landlord. So tenants that have a sustainability vision, for example, it's really important that they find a landlord with that similar vision. So ULI's Greenprint Center is chock full of them. Obviously, Jessica can speak to that firsthand, but if you're on the tenant side and you're considering a move, you can look at a list of Greenprint members, go to our website to look at some of the resources that are up there. That'll give you a good idea of some landlords that are really moving the needle forward on these activities. And if you're on the landlord side, you're probably familiar with what you can do to promote your sustainability message through Greenprint and through other initiatives.
Yeah, and so you'll see up here on the screen, we do have corporate-wide performance goals, which we try to educate our tenants and perform various initiatives to encourage our tenants to participate in the effort of reducing overall consumption. So here we're just showing our 2013 static goals of 20% reduction to energy, water, and emissions, excuse me, and a 75% diversion rate by 2020, which was inspired by Better Buildings. And then just recently, we were ready to take it a step further and are working on approval of our science-based targets. And really, with these goals and commitments, they all play into a broader tenant engagement strategy and helps to positively impact tenants to help reduce costs, have a sense of community on trying to achieve a similar goal, and to ultimately help our Earth reduce its quickly increasing temperature. And at the building level, we participate in things like Energy Star benchmarking and labeling, LEED for existing buildings, Fitwell certifications. All of these strive towards various sustainable development goals that highlight overall performance at the corporate level down to each individual property. And these initiatives are all, again, corporate initiated for our tenants, but they reap the benefits of these initiatives. So the tenants have various tools we provide to them, such as the Green Tenant Improvement Guide, and that is specifically an and operational improvements. So when they are going through a tenant improvement, we actually have a list of options and materials that they can utilize if they are interested. And then the other part is the Green Tenant Guide, which is a behavioral based. So that's for any tenant that just to ultimately utilize their space sustainably is what that guide would be. And then we do have our green lease language. And then I would say, you know, just being in the state of California with Title 24 requirements, there really are performance goals these tenants are achieving regardless if they intended to or not, which is pretty great in my opinion.
So with step 4, the next few steps are really going to be about modeling energy, calculating returns, all of the steps that you want to take to make sure that you're selecting the best measures. So when you talk about energy modeling, there's a couple ways that you can handle it. You can go all in, which is fantastic, and that can be hiring a third-party consultant, that can be doing a full-scale energy model for the whole building or the whole space. Lots of options there, which are obviously goals to reach for. However, if that's cost prohibitive, there are ways that energy modeling can be done on a much smaller scale that is not going to require, you know, going all out if that's just prohibitive for you. So what that should include, if you're not going a third-party route, is making sure that you're including and modeling out for all options and alternatives for any ECM, any energy conservation measure that you're looking at. So that should include things like the life expectancy of the ECM, the cost, any maintenance required down the line, payback calculations. So looking at both the IRR, the internal rate of return, ROI, you know, all those hot ticket metrics that you hear about. This is the time to be considering them, so that you can better understand what it means for your bottom line. So you can, and you definitely should, also take it one step further to be adding in various combinations of ECM. So, you know, what does your bottom line and energy consumption look like if you've got a more efficient HVAC and LED lighting, but you don't do anything about window filter treatments? Or on the reverse, you know, what does your bottom line look like if you do new window treatments and that's it? So Jessica can walk you through a great example and some of how Commonwealth muddles through these steps in the process.
Yeah, and I would say from our perspective, our lease structure does not involve any energy modeling requirements. We analyze our various options through just at a building level when we have common area or mechanical-based improvements that we would like to do. We analyze through our engineers' calculations. And so I wanted to provide for an example, we had a window film project where there's pretty much this affected every single tenant with a window for the installer to properly install. And our engineers went and determined that it was not necessarily necessary to apply the window film to all 4 sides of the towers, just the 2 with direct sun. So that kind of helped reduce the burden for those tenants. And then they performed their own calculations through an Excel spreadsheet, as simple as that, starting with a collection of RFP responses, followed by revising into realistic calculations. One tip we've always noticed is that whenever there's maintenance costs that has been identified as a reduction, it's not really true in our opinion, because you can't just remove an employee, so it's still going to be there. So we provide our own calculations in that way, and then we submit that to corporate for review and approval each year, and that's how we were able to do that. From the tenant's perspective, CNP tenants can pay a prorated per square footage basis. So obviously it's preferable to have submeters, they're ideal, but with older buildings like this one, it's 1972, and the sheer size, it's not totally an option at that point for every tenant. So the landlord will have the master meter, and any new tenants can certainly request to install a submeter. And there are studies showing that tenants are a lot more likely to conserve resources if they see the amount of consumption. In particular, there was a study done through the Rocky Mountain Institute that made the case for those that perform energy modeling on those bigger ticket items, using standard metrics, could see around an average of 20 to 30% savings, but when you use an energy modeling, you could potentially see a 50% savings. So it's great. Energy modeling is pretty costly, so it doesn't always make the most financial sense to conduct one on a smaller tenant improvement. If there's a major improvement with maintenance equipment involved, it may have a greater incentive to see a better result. And design teams are increasingly working with software tools to provide data to analyze commercial buildings retrofits in order to achieve the greatest energy savings within budget. And reliable whole building energy and financial analysis are necessary to achieve those increasingly aggressive performance targets. And the images here, these are just an energy model of City National Plaza from a long time ago. That was a free energy modeling tool that we were able to use, actually, and it really was helpful in the major programs that we were trying to implement at that time.
Right. So this is Dave. I just wanted to kind of underline a point, which is that you know, the TOP framework is flexible. So while energy modeling is a valuable exercise, a valuable tool, you know, in a ideal world, it can be expensive, especially for a large property like City National Plaza. So other ways of calculating returns on investment for improvements that will affect tenant space can also work. But I think the principle is, you know, taking a science-based approach to quantifying the potential benefits of different projects and tailoring that to the scope of what you're trying to do, I think.
Dave, I think we got
Absolutely.
Lost on our slides here. I'm sorry, I can't go back.
Yeah, I think we might want to be 2 back. There we go.
Oops. There we are.
Step
Okay.
1 more.
Okay.
So, Dave, I think that's a great introduction because step 5 is just a natural progression from all of this. And as you're saying, Dave, you definitely just want to be using logic, you know, mathematics, statistics to base your decision. So this is step 5 with calculating your projected financial returns. You don't want to be making decisions on a whim, basically.
That's right. With this next step, it's really developing a baseline or a business as usual case to compare against the value of the future efficiency savings and investments. And you want to make sure that you understand how much energy is being consumed as a baseline before the initiation of the project. So that's where you're then going to be able to identify the opportunities. Often energy systems are original and outdated, which was in our case, and upgrades in the systems and operations really showed a 20 to 50% energy consumption. So without us recognizing that business as usual case could be a huge barrier to those trying to understand energy efficiency. So these capital investments become avoided future costs when efficiency investments replace them, and making efficiency much more economical. So I'd say, for instance, the bar chart shown here is a baseline of our CNP project, and this was over an identified 7 years of that case study. And the building saved over $12 million in energy costs. And without establishing a baseline, we would not be able to identify that, the extent of the amount of money that we could have been wasting essentially today. And the other area I'd like to note is an example of a decision-making process. So here, we want to make sure you look at various measures in calculating financial returns. So here we're evaluating 2 similar projects, occupancy sensors and time clocks. When you're faced with a choice between 2 upgrades, It's better to use the net present value instead of the internal rate of return to guide the decision, because the net present value measures the total value of the investment to the organization. And if you look at these two options, for example, on whether you should invest in time clocks versus occupancy sensors, the occupancy sensors will have the higher first cost. And the central time clock has a higher IRR. But on a NVP analysis, the occupancy sensors are a much better investment in the long run. And also, I would say you'd want to look at your lease agreement here. Again, maybe you can embed a 10-year value tool to help determine the best option for you. So I would say to compete for an investment capital, building upgrade projects should be evaluated using those standard financial analysis tools that evaluate cash flow. So although reliance on payback period is widespread, other tools like the NVP and the IRR are better choices because they take into account the time value of money and the full stream of benefits over the life of the project. And that's what we're looking at. Energy Star actually has a great investment tool that I would recommend taking a look at if you're not familiar with it. And really, those retrofits chosen and the impacts on cost savings will determine that financial risk that you're looking for.
So with step 6, this step is really all about taking all that data crunching, all the calculations that you've done in whatever manner you've done, however you've gotten to that end, and starting to actually make your final decisions. So this is very much a quantitative decision, but I do want to emphasize it is also somewhat qualitative. While not ignoring the quantitative, some of it needs to be based on looking at the bigger picture. So quantitatively, there may be some things that are going to give you a quick, fast, ideal payback, but maybe that's just not, maybe that's prohibitive for you for whatever reason, for an upfront cost reason, whatever it might be. So make sure you're factoring in your lease clauses so that you've, from step 2, that you've, hopefully your very, very green lease, your energy aligned lease that you've already started to put into play. So did you and your landlord perhaps agree to pass-through clauses for the cost of improvements? What can be spread out over the lease? So definitely be looking at the big picture as well as the individual quantitative calculations that you've come up with.
Yeah, and I would say from our landlord perspective, when we analyze those calculations from step 6, from step 5, step 6 is really about making the final decision. And so what I'd recommend is an economic decision-making tree. And that's really to evaluate your individual bundled measures and that it makes sense to implement some measures at once, or do you want to spread them out over several years? You want to really evaluate that. Perform a gap analysis. Use your net present value to choose between mutually exclusive investments, and then create a pathway to your ultimate goal so that your current plan explains how decisions today will impact goals down the road. The other key financing mechanisms are through performance contracting and emerging mechanisms. So smart and integrated structures take advantage of rebates, incentives, and innovative financing structures to fund retrofits and can ensure risk-taking with your key stakeholders. So some of the main performance contracting financing mechanisms are those financing arranged by an ESCO and emerging mechanisms, PACE, on-bill financing, and energy service agreements. So some of the lessons learned with that we found is that financing structures that involve properties with debt and mortgages are more challenging for most building owners because it's a debt obligation that requires lender permission, and owners need to sign a loan agreement that may violate their previous mortgage. So interesting companies that are using innovative financing structures are emerging, like Transcend and Metris Energy. But what we found is that most owners can self-finance and prefer handling things in-house versus involving third-party entities, which is our case. And another interesting thing is that REITs have to go to revolving credit facilities or investors, and money spent on capital is money that can't be distributed to investors. So when you're using these types of structures, the ESA and PACE means less debt on their books. So overall, after you've identified your retrofit measures, you've performed your gap analysis and found ways to pay for the next step, is to implement and build the projects and commission them if possible.
So with step 7, we're going to be starting to set the stage for maintaining efficient operations and maintenance once the space has actually been built out. So this is developing your occupancy plan. So for this step, you want to be taking a keen eye to what kind of space you're dealing with. So obviously we're talking offices here, but if you're a landlord on the phone and maybe you've got a mixed use portfolio, maybe you have a building with offices up top and retail spaces on the bottom, these are all times to be considering how you as a landlord can be better using your lease structure and your build out process to fit and to better fit the tenant that you are dealing with. So this is the time to be thinking about, are there different light sensors? Are there different monitoring and managing mechanisms that you want to put in place? So think of the schedule of the usage of the building. This is a step that you want to be thinking about all of those different pieces.
And I would say with this section, I'd say regardless of whether the tenant space is temporarily or permanently metered by an end use, you want to make sure the plan covers measurement and verification steps. And that includes the collection of electric meter data by space or floor at a minimum. And then the end use, if possible, would be something like monthly electricity consumption and demand consumed at every submeter. You really want to understand where the energy is coming from and going. I mean, it'd be ideal to have 1 hour of electricity consumption on a trend data consumed at every submeter for a 2-week period in the heating season, the cooling season, and in those shoulder seasons. And then a 10-minute trend of all the HVAC fan speed commands would be also ideal in addition to commissioning. And then we move to green leasing. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, one of the key financing mechanisms for retrofits is through energy aligned leases. So whether this is a capital expense or an operating expense, it's really important for retrofits because your lease recovery language can make some retrofit projects unfeasible. So there's a lot of guidance within the market in ways to address leasing split incentive dilemmas so that they can finance high-performing retrofit projects. But I'd say energy-aligned lease agreements will give private owners an incentive to make their buildings more efficient because they can share the costs as well as the benefits of the improvements. And then another important thing is that the lease should contain savings over the length of the projected payback period, instead of the useful life of the improvements to reduce the amount of time that it takes to recoup those initial investments. So again, with energy aligned leases, those are really, I'd say, a win-win scenario because, but I guess while tenants would enjoy the benefits of a sustainable, smarter property with lower operating expenses, and the benefits to the investors will be limited by the leases, holding periods, and the ability to have tenants pay for the benefits that they receive. So I'd say that's where we get into the education portion when we initiate collaborative programs like our internal Battle of the Buildings boot camp, which is from EPA, various signage, and our Green Office Guide competition. Those are areas that you're going to see improvements overall.
So with step 8, this is where you're actually building out. So this one's pretty self-explanatory when you're actually building out. But what I will say is the communication here is critical. So don't let all the planning and all the data gathering that you've done in steps 1 through 7 fall to the wayside here. Continual close communication with all of those that are actually part of the physical build-out process is critical so that your plans are actually implemented in the efficient manner you intended them to be.
Yeah, and I'd say what's really important is to have those engineers that are on site to review the work from any of the other firms that you're using to comply with those base building requirements. There's base building lights that must be the same to ensure that they are in stock and can accommodate the existing structure. And really, it's just to be sure you're communicating with the team. Changes are inevitably going to happen, so you want to keep those communication lines open throughout that process to have a healthy relationship between the landlord and the tenant.
So it's step 9, even though this is the second to last step in the process, this should actually really be viewed as the first step of the future. This implementation of the occupancy plan and everything that you've already developed needs to be ongoing. So you definitely want to take a keen eye to implementing your plan right after the build out. But things like retro commissioning, things like maintaining your space, measurement and verification, all of that needs to be an ongoing process. And again, just like you want to make sure in step 8 that the space is getting built out to the efficiency standards you set out, step 9 is the time to set the stage to make sure that you know how you're going to continue to maintain your efficient space as efficiently as it possibly can be.
Yeah, I like that, Emily. I definitely agree with the education is the first step. And so we really try to host various training sessions, lunch and learns, to show what initiatives we have done. We really like to highlight when tenants perform energy efficiency improvements. And then we ensure our base building performs the ongoing maintenance and retro commissioning procedures. And it really is up to the tenants to do the same. So we try to provide as much assistance and nudging as possible for that. And then part of our green lease language, again, is to ensure that they perform those efficiency best practices. And then circling back to our green tenant guides, that's where we provide the guidance on how to improve. And then what we also do is a green office challenge. And this program provides several simple and low-cost strategies to create highly efficient green buildings and offices. And this really was designed to be used in conjunction with the Green Tenant Improvement Guide. And one of the features of this Green Office program is our points-based challenge scorecard. So similar to, you could compare with LEED, there's a scorecard. It enables tenants to track their performance and progress across 5 categories, which would be, we have it as transportation, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, indoor environmental quality, and innovation. And then the tenants receive a rating ranging from 2 to 5 stars with a maximum 100-point scale. And really, this is just a friendly competition we conduct annually in the fall, and it allows tenants who are making improvements to gain recognition across the organization. And we provide announcements and plaques for those tenants that do participate. Everyone gets a ribbon who has provided, so it's sort of a nice way to get people to think about it. And because we do it every year, it helps to see who has made monumental steps within that time frame.
All right, so we made it to the end. Step 10. Step 10 is all about communication. And you can think of the communication as twofold. This is communicating continual transparency, having continual communication and transparency of your energy usage to make sure both landlord and tenant are on the same page and understand what's going on with energy consumption so that stopgaps can be put in place and fixes can be brought up as needed. This also can be the communication of communicating any sort of certification, awards, improvements, membership, any of that the landlord and or the tenant is a part of. But I will let Jessica take this one away, since Commonwealth has a ton of examples that are really really stellar in this step.
Thanks. I'd say the point of communicating results is that we want to demonstrate how CWP not only has ingrained sustainability into our internal practices, but we've partnered with third-party organizations to gain recognition, achieve certifications, and better communicate our commitments that actually show some kind of quantifiable goals. So you can all recognize when you perform that certification, everyone understands what that means. So I'd say our methodology is to provide an annual sustainability calendar so the tenants understand consistently, where we have those competitions and events to help remember those initiatives and get them encouraged to do the same. And then we include our 2 newsletters per year and our annual public sustainability report. And in these, we do like to highlight where tenants are going above and beyond and deserve to be showcased for that. And here we can also show our results and our like-for-like energy reduction, achieving our long-term reduction targets. And I'd say for here, the images that I have up here are referencing the Energy Star emission targets at the property, which we found this is to be a really useful image for tenants. And they've commented that it gives a better understanding of how making these improvements at this location has helped to see the emission savings through comparison of other metrics. And we found that really useful. And the other image is something that I came up with to give a better kind of bite-sized perspective to the existing tenant, but also to the prospective tenant on the various sustainability initiatives that we have on site. And overall, we're really proud of the initiatives we've continued to implement, and we do see progress year over year and always have room for growth. But we're really excited to be able to highlight some of that today.
All right, so to conclude, before I pass it back over to Dave, and I think we might have some time for some Q&A, how do you get involved? So you've been hearing for the last 50 minutes or so about this TIAP process, this previously mysterious, now well-known process to all of you. So the first step, I'd encourage you guys to go look at our website. On that, there's a pledge. And what doing that pledge does is it sends a signal to us that you're interested in building out sustainably, that no matter where you are on a lease spaces build out cycle, you're committing to this and you're pledging to following this process to help move the needle forward on sustainability. So if you follow that and you go to our website, there's tons of resources. Additionally, I do want to call out that while this has been focused on offices, look out in the next 6 to 12 months for some adaptations of the tenant energy optimization program. So you'll be seeing industrial, multifamily, and retail coming down soon. So look out for that. And then lastly, reach out to us. We want to hear your story, and more so than that, we want to be able to tell your story. So if you're on the phone and you know you've got a really great space that either you're leasing, you've been participating in the build out process, wherever you fall, use the TIAP website, use my email address at the end. We want to tell your story. We want to do a case study on you. We love to tell stories of all these efficient spaces.
Great. Well, thank you both. That was a lot of content to cover in a short time. I just wanted to, underline a few things and get onto some questions. I know we're close to the end of our time, but maybe a clarification on one thing that came up earlier is that benchmarking laws, in LA and a lot of other cities around the country do require whole building data, and that may not include individual tenant data because utilities are sensitive to not singling out individual tenants, but they can provide whole building aggregated data. And so now tenant energy performance matters in a way that it maybe didn't before when it wasn't accessible. This is a template, just to underscore again what Emily was speaking about, that can be adapted. So no matter whether this is a new topic for your organization or you're looking for some ideas for best practices to slot in, as in the case of Commonwealth with their very well-developed tenant engagement strategy, or to provide more of a framework overlay to an existing strategy to see if there are any gaps. We think it's a really compelling framework. That's the link to download it. And there's a lot more here. So again, this was a lot to cover in a short time, so encourage people to follow up. I do have a slide with contact information for all of the speakers. And the link, again, was there on the slides, and we will be circulating this. So we have some questions coming in. We'll try to squeeze those in. The first question, I think this will be for Emily, is can this framework apply in the context of a residential property? And I think we're talking about multifamily.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the framework that we were talking about today is the original TEOP framework that was written for offices. As far as a specific multifamily resource, that's one of the ones that will be coming in our adaptations. So as far as kind of your own 10 steps, stay tuned. But what I will say is, if you go through the 10 steps, there's a lot of core information in them that can already be readily applied to residential and multifamily spaces. It may just not be worded in exactly the same manner. So in multifamily, it's usually a resident, not a tenant. And obviously there's a lot more of the behavior change that's involved in residential multifamily. So stay tuned if you're looking for a specific resource, but definitely reach out to me if you're looking to point you in some of which of these steps you would be able to follow now, even without that adaptation formally published.
Yeah, and I think just tying back to the earlier point that I was underlining about whole building data and benchmarking, it's a big deal for multifamily, where you've got tenants that are generally individually submetered, and where their behavior as individuals has more of an impact on total building energy use. So it's a really great question.
Just had another question come in. It's actually about step 6. And the question is, why does the LED retrofit have a negative NPV, net present value, if the cost is $300,000 and the annual savings is $150,000?
Perhaps that was a typo on the slide. Must have been a typo on the slide. Good attention to detail. Whoever answered that question, I think you caught a typo. Thank you.
Just had another question come in, noting that the program is primarily focused on new tenant build-outs. Do you have any thoughts on overcoming barriers for established tenants that may not be as motivated to prioritize energy efficiency?
It's a great question. So obviously the easiest time to start this program is going to be when you're doing a re-up of your lease or something like that. So I definitely encourage, that would be the first piece. Anytime there's a renegotiation of a lease, definitely start using this framework. Otherwise, it really depends on what your lease structure is. It really depends on a lot of the current relationship between the landlord and the tenant. The most frequent thing I think I usually hear is from the tenant side, they say, well, my landlord wouldn't do this. And then from the landlord side, they say, my tenant wouldn't care about that. But neither one has actually reached out and communicated to the other one. So I'd say no matter which side you're on, if you're a landlord interested in doing tenant sustainability, or if you're a tenant that really would prefer your landlord to help you on this, just start that conversation now, no matter where you are in your lease process. It never hurts to ask, and more often than not, once you ask, that ball starts rolling in ways that you didn't really imagine before.
And please follow up with both of us, because again, this is a huge opportunity, and our contact information is there. So we hope that this is sparking ideas and will lead to follow-up conversations. Great. There was another question just came in about brokers and how to find brokers that are kind of familiar with these concepts. I wonder if either of you have any tips in that regard. I know a handful, but I'm wondering if there's any sort of designations you're aware of, or perhaps through Green Lease Leaders, if there are brokers or brokerage houses or offices that are involved with that.
Yeah, Dave, you can, so National Association of Realtors has some resources on their website. Likewise for appraisers, the Appraisal Institute and Foundation also have some resources. I know that wasn't the specific question, but definitely would look at those. Any broker that's been awarded a Green Lease Leaders designation, you can assume is very, very sustainability minded. So those would be the first places to start.
Okay, so Green Lease Leaders is a good place to check. Wonderful. I see we are at time. So I'm going to call it there. I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. Next month's webinar will be almost taking a step back from this, zooming out a bit and looking at fundamentals of a successful energy and water management strategy. And of course, tenant engagement is a key component of that. We'll have another of our partners, Sarah Neff, who's a wonderful speaker from Kilroy Realty, and one of our technical advisors, Wayne Aldridge, speaking on more of the operations, technology integration side. Emily, Jessica, thank you again. This was fantastic, and thank you to the Urban Land Institute. I look forward to doing more work together, and thanks everybody for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.